Good morning. Welcome to a fresh week, our last week of the current series of hashtag LDeduchat leadership development in education. It's been a phenomenal series of amazing guests that we've had for the last few months. We've had now over 50 sessions. This is our 52nd session today, and we've got another 4 after today. So we will be having a total of 56, those of you that are good at maths, sessions as part of the current series, plus our bonus one that we did with Black Lives Matters and anti-racism. Make sure you subscribe, make sure you hit that bell. We've got so much more material that we'll be sending out through various ways, and it'll all appear on our Chiltern Teaching School Alliance YouTube channel, and you'll get notifications as and when we upload that, and that is from Monday this time next week onwards, and for the coming academic year. So make sure you do subscribe. Over on Twitter today, we've got our CEO for Chiltern Learning Trust. We've got Adrian Rogers, who will be doing the Twitter takeover of @Chiltern TSA. @Chiltern TSA, make sure you follow us, where we make all our announcements about upcoming sessions, but also to join the conversation during our sessions as well. And it's been really, really good to see the level of engagement when I've searched for the hashtag LDeduchat on those dreary evenings and thinking what are people doing, and finding people that are jumping onto our YouTube channel, watching them, and then posting comments about their views and comments on what we've produced. So do make sure you engage with us, and thank you for those of you that have been. It really, really does make what we're doing worthwhile, and it also opens up the CPD that we have on offer to everybody that needs it moving forward. So today we have Claire Robbins from Scholars Education Trust, who will be looking at research approach to driving improvement through innovation. And the trust itself, it has just under half a dozen schools within there, and they do fantastic work in terms of some of the practices they've got in place, and so much of it is based on research-based or research-informed practice. So it would be a fascinating session today. Without further ado, let's jump straight into Claire Robbins' OBE session, and I'll see you afterwards.
Good morning, everyone. My name is Claire Robbins, and I'm head of Sir John Law School in Harpenden and CEO of the Scholars Education Trust, a small mixed mat in the east of England. And I'm here to speak to you this morning about our experience of engaging with and using research to, as the title says, drive innovation and improvement. As I'm sure many people say at the start of these webinars, I'm rather overwhelmed to be contributing to a series which has had contributions from people who I consider to be the rock stars of our profession. And given the stage of the term at which we find ourselves and the type of term it has been, I hope you'll excuse me if my thoughts appear a little disjointed at times, but I promise you I am doing my best. Just to give a bit of context for what I'm going to talk about for the next sort of 25 minutes or so, I'm aware that the audience for these webinars is excitingly cross-phase and sector, but I think a lot of the things I'm going to be talking about can work and be adapted to any setting, and I certainly know they can work in primary and secondary because, as I say, our mat is a mixed mat, and we do use these approaches in both settings. I also know that not everybody watching these webinars is based in the UK, but again, I think the general principles of how we've used research in an educational setting can apply wherever you are. And I guess as a sidebar, I think the way that educational research has started to cross borders recently is one of the exciting aspects of the whole area of educational research. When I mention specific projects or programs, I'm not on commission. They are just examples of work we have done in our school, and I'm confident that there will be other similar excellent programs available in your area. And finally, if there's anyone from the university sector out there, or people who are what one might refer to as professional researchers, then I apologise in advance for anything I say that has you throwing things at the screen. I've been party to many debates about what does and doesn't actually officially count as proper research, and I've got the scars to prove it. So please take this as a disclaimer that I am first and foremost a teacher and a school leader, and I'll be talking about research in that context, which is kind of a combination of action research, reflecting on one's own practice, and engagement with external formal research in publications or other sources. So if that doesn't fit your definition of research, then I'm really sorry, and please don't sue. When I started thinking in preparation for this presentation about the role research has played for me and my colleagues, a few things occurred to me. Firstly, just how much the role of research in the life and practice of a teacher has changed since I was training. If I'm absolutely honest, I don't remember very much about research at all when I was completing my PGCE. I remember we had lectures on child development, so I do remember Piaget's theories of development, of course I do, but I don't really remember much else. I certainly don't seem to have been given or purchased any texts at that time that I kept with me. I do remember some books about behaviour management, and I have retained some of that because even all that time ago, people were suggesting that greeting students at the door to the classroom and making them welcome to your space was a good way of operating. So I guess some things have stuck with me and maybe some things just haven't changed. But I definitely don't remember anything really subject specific that developed or challenged my knowledge of teaching English, which is my subject. We devised schemes of learning for specific texts or aspects of language, but there was nothing about deepening our knowledge or building the students' knowledge. We were never given any insight into the process and impact of assessment, although I do remember being told that I shouldn't write on a student's work because I was defacing their personal property. And in the early years of my teaching career, although I worked in amazing schools with fantastic role models and mentors, I don't remember much CPD that really looked at the craft of teaching or meeting students' needs or helping them really progress that was in any way underpinned with anything other than anecdotal evidence along the lines of, well, this worked for me, so you could try it. I suppose, for me, my early years of teaching were informed by research only to the extent that trial and error is a form of research. And I know I was never really asked to reflect on any aspect of my teaching, other than in terms of, well, they behaved and I got through the lesson plan. It wasn't until I started a Master's in Education through the HeartsCam programme, of which more later, in about 1999, that I really became aware of educational research and what evidence was out there that could really enhance my practice. I'm glad to say that the experience of trainees and new teachers these days is very different. And as a result, I think the experience of children in the classroom is immeasurably improved. And I think some of that is down to the way in which the profession has come to engage with research, certainly since the turn of this century, which I love saying, it makes me feel like a Victorian lady. So how is my operation engaging with research and how can we show its leading innovation and improvement? Well, for a long time now, individual staff at Sir John Laws have reflected on their practice and looked for things to read and people to talk to that might offer new ideas and approaches to teaching and learning. And actually, this probably dates back to about 2003, really, when we first became a training school, the forerunner of teaching schools. But we probably started to engage more formally at a whole school level with research about 4 or 5 years ago. Since then, staff across the piece have been better informed, yes, but in addition to this, our practice has improved and our culture is more professional. So just to give you an example of the kind of ways we have become more research focused, we have a teaching and learning handbook that's research informed and provides staff with reading lists and links to access further research into any areas they're interested in. Staff are encouraged, possibly even expected, to use research to inform new developments, whether this might be as part of an individual learning project, which I'll say a bit more about later, or an innovation within a faculty area, or even whole school improvement. Engagement with research is modelled by key staff, whether this be in referencing inset materials, pre-reading from meetings, or teachers with expertise in areas of educational research, sourcing and sharing materials with their colleagues. We've widened our engagement with CPD opportunities that enable staff to engage more deeply with educational research, and we've begun to share research more explicitly with students, families and governors, so that everyone in the school community can understand the rationale behind our curriculum and develop a clearer appreciation of how learning happens and maybe how we come to other decisions about the way the school works. So all these things have benefited us, I think, in different ways, but the key point at which engagement with research really began to have an impact was probably the point at which research became embedded. In other words, one-off strategies such as a journal club, which we do have, can be fine, but all these things only start to have a genuine impact if they're part of a research thread that runs through the school. I think that thread now does run through the school and indeed the wider trust, and I think you can see its impact in areas almost too numerous to cover in one session. So I'm going to pick on a few for you just to talk in a little bit more detail about our work. So I'm going to talk to you a little bit about research to support strategic development priorities, research to support curriculum development, research to support individual members of staff, and research to support school and trust cultures. We'll start by looking at how we've used research to support school priorities. And we really believe that being research informed has a particularly significant impact if it does support the delivery of the school's priorities. So a recent example would be our review of the school's approach to assessment and feedback policies. Our school priorities arise from a synthesis of staff, student and parent feedback, and this area has been consistently highlighted, especially our marking policies as requiring attention. So as a first step, we set up a school improvement group, a group of about 15 volunteer teachers from a range of faculties and with a range of roles, to meet 6 times in a year with the aim of improving our marking policy. Before the first meeting, our journal club, which is open to all, had looked at the Education Endowment Foundation's report into marking and feedback, our Marked Improvement 2016, and our middle leaders had reflected on their faculty assessment policies using advice from the NFER report on marking and workload. At the first meeting, 7 different research articles on marking and feedback were shared and discussed by everyone who joined the school improvement group. This gave them a knowledge base moving forward. And in the second meeting, they shared and discussed feedback policies from other schools, the best of which also had research links. This widened the knowledge base and gave us an indication of how things might look in practice. Several months on, we felt confident that the changes we'd made to marking and feedback as a journal rules were more likely to work because they'd been based on and verified by research. And indeed, feedback from staff, students and parents has been really positive about the changes we've made. Interestingly, we've also found that engaging with the research can support improvement priorities when coming from the opposite direction, so to speak. A year ago, our observations of learning were telling us that although behaviour in the school was very good generally, students might learn better if there was less low-level chat in the classrooms. We felt that higher expectations of silence rather than quiet during individual work and teacher instruction especially would improve things. At this point, we didn't base our conclusions on research, but on observation and experience. So our next step was to look back at the research to check if we were thinking on the right lines or if we were about to implement something based on intuition rather than evidence. The teaching and learning team met to discuss 6 research sources about attention and science in lessons. They then drew points from this, cross-referenced with our own observations, and compiled a list of desirable expectations and strategies for silence in classrooms. These were then shared with teachers more widely, who were also reassured by the research underpinning this. Finally, tutors and heads of year presented students with an assembly on the benefits of silence, attention and focus in the classroom, with research cited and used to indicate positive effects on learning and long-term memory. Although this example might seem a topsy-turvy way of doing things because we started with our conclusion and then tried to prove it, it does show how research can also be used effectively to confirm, reassure, persuade, or perhaps encourage a rethink at the endpoint of strategic decisions. It also shows one of the ways in which we're now referring to research with students and helping them understand why we make certain decisions about the way we do things. In some ways, this overlaps with the previous point in that the curriculum has been at the heart of strategic development for schools for the last few years, and I suspect will continue to be so for several years to come. So how have we used research to support the curriculum? Well, when I was a head of English in the late 90s, most curriculum review or development was really concerned with how we were going to deliver the most recent national curriculum and exam syllabuses. Looking back on it, it was all rather shallow and generic. It didn't really reflect that there were differences between subjects or that there might be differences in the philosophy or aims of each subject. If I compare that to our approach to our recent review of curriculum across the Trust, I can see how different, and I think better, things are now because of the use of research, and more importantly, in this context, subject-specific research to support our decisions. Last summer, a lifetime ago now, we brought all the Trust heads of faculty together to review their curriculum delivery. We grouped them by subject so they could talk to fellow scientists or historians rather than to middle leaders from subjects that might have a completely different agenda, which I think again shows how important we now consider that subject specialist focus to be. But more importantly, in advance of the meeting, we provided them with a range of reading on the issues we'd be discussing. On the slide, apologies, it's quite small, is a list of wider reading on curriculum that we signposted to get them thinking in advance about what we wanted them to achieve for their area. We also, as you can see here, provided them with subject-specific material where it was available. And then, in the good old tradition of extension activities, there was a list of further research, books, articles that they might find helpful. None of this reading was compulsory, but we did find it was welcomed by those taking part, and of course many of them had read their own materials from subject associations and other sources, which they brought with them. All of this meant that the discussions between middle leaders had an underpinning of reading and research that really gave their decisions and plans a solid basis. Cynically, as someone who's facilitated a lot of sessions like this one, it also meant that when they were asked to start talking in their groups, the reading helped break the ice, as it was something that they could all comment on. The material wasn't designed to be a set of the answers. It was almost more a series of provocations. And it did the job. It did provoke a far deeper engagement with the task than if we just asked the participants to start from scratch. As a result, I fear that our trust middle leaders achieved far more in the meetings than they would have done otherwise. And I know that they are able to produce evidence and support to back up their decisions about curriculum much more convincingly now too. As a sort of aside as a trust, we are very aware that in the light of recent national and international events, there's a real onus on us to review our curriculum again to ensure it reflects our country and society as they really are in 2020, particularly with reference to Black Lives Matter and the BAME agenda. What I found really interesting is that even without us raising that yet with staff, because of the weird remote working that we're all doing at the moment, I'm actually already receiving recommendations of reading, webinars and other material from colleagues who clearly have now made a mind shift from the anecdotal to the evidence-based. And I think this will be really helpful to us as we navigate some of these complicated issues. And again, as a side note, if you haven't already watched the outstanding Chiltern webinar on Black Lives Matter, then please stop watching my ramblings and go and do that now. So that's an example of how we've used research to support curriculum thinking and how we would definitely be doing that in the future with further curriculum issues. But now maybe to move on to how we've used research to support individual members of staff. The fact that staff are sharing and recommending research to one another as a starting point for conversations about what we're providing for students in school leads me on to this aspect of the work that we've done, which is offering individual members of staff opportunities to do their own research to develop areas of their practice. And this takes place at various different levels. And this is also the point at which proper researchers might start to become irritated. So I'm issuing a trigger warning to them now. At the simplest level, for several years now, all staff who engage with student learning, so teachers, LSAs, cover supervisors and librarians, have taken part in what we refer to as learning projects. Each individual highlights an area of their work that they'd like to develop, which aligns with one of the school priorities for that year, and then spends time across the year reflecting, researching, discussing with others and trialling different ideas to develop that area. And the time comes from a mixture of staff time, giving up their own time, and also the school's inset arrangements. They're supported by other members of staff and they're grouped with others looking at areas within the same priority to give them someone to bounce ideas off. More experienced staff can support them by signposting useful research that they might not have come across as well. And in fact, we have a specific email address, evidence@sjl, that they can use to ask for help with that. On the slide, you can see some examples of the kind of things staff have focused on and how we group them together. Again, it's quite small, so I've pulled out just a few examples, which I hope you can see slightly better here. So here, Ben, Emma and Liz, so 2 English teachers and an MFL teacher, have chosen foci which fit with our school priority that year of improving boys' progress and achievement, and which were appropriate to the work they were doing that year. Generally classes that they're teaching, although in Liz's case, she's actually head of the faculty, so she'd chosen a wider focus, which of course she's at liberty to do. At the end of the year, during one of our inset sessions, we create a marketplace at which staff set up stalls where they present the projects and other staff are able to wander around and discuss those projects with them. Finally, the staff all write short summaries of their findings, which are published as an internal reference resource for all staff. If I'm honest, the impact of these projects beyond the end of the year can vary. Some somewhat fade away, but the very best can have a lasting impact, such as the work one of our heads of year did on using nurture groups, which has led to a shift in school policy. And more importantly, as well as the obvious benefit to individuals of spending time reflecting on their own practice, these projects also mean that conversations about pedagogy, research and improvement are really normal parts of our working lives now. And it's completely usual to hear people discussing these things around the school. Those who really enjoy the learning projects often move on to the next level of research opportunity, which is our teacher-led development work, which for us is supported through the HeartsCam organisation, an organisation originally founded by Hearts Local Authority and the University of Cambridge, and there's a clue in the title, but it's now an entity in its own right supported by the University of Hertfordshire as its awarding body. So John Law School has been part of the HeartsCam TLDW programme since 2003, and I know that there'll be people watching this who've also worked or are working with them. Although I don't want to go into too much detail here, because it's the process, not the particular programme that I want to focus on, I do urge you to have a look at their website if you find what I'm saying of interest. Although it was Hearts-based originally, it now has groups in Luton, Somerset, and the TLDW programme is actually international, with branches in countries such as Greece, Portugal, Macedonia, Turkey, and many more. So it's really easy to get involved. But their teacher-led development work is about supporting teacher leadership through a methodology which enables teachers to design and lead projects focused on particular aspects of change. The reason that we find it's really attractive to teachers is that it's time-bounded, so it seems manageable. It just lasts for a year. It's specific because it focuses on a particular challenge or problem, and it's collaborative because it involves project design and explicit action plans based on consultation and negotiation with colleagues. There's a cost to the programme, which in our case we cover as a trust because we've seen the way it can energise and infuse staff who take part, and because, again, the best of the projects can stimulate real change in schools. On average, 15 to 20 members of staff take part in this programme across the trust, and there are individual school groups which are led by senior members of staff who've been trained in supporting this work. They hold meetings in school, and there are also regular wider network events where all those taking part in the programme across an area are brought together to share their progress and challenge each other about their ideas and their findings. As schools have joined our trust, we've brought them into this programme, and it's proved to be one of the really successful aspects of our work. If I click through the next few slides, you can see some examples of recent projects carried out by members of staff. Again, at the end of the process, their summaries were published for other staff to consider and as possible stimuli for the next cohort. Again, some of these projects just have the effect of providing a sense of development and satisfaction for the individual, but some have been taken up more widely and led to improvements in the way we work as a whole. And this year-long programme can also provide a stepping stone to the final way in which we encourage staff to engage with research on a personal level through master's level study. As a trust, we're happy to support any member of staff who wants to undertake a master's in whatever area they choose, and we will make a financial contribution to their costs, and I'll say a tiny bit more about that later. The majority of our staff, however, go on to master's level study through the HeartScan Masters in Teaching, in Leading Teaching and Learning. This is because most have done the TLDW as their first step into research and further study, and are therefore comfortable with staying with the same organisation. And actually, we make it easy for them by supporting us across the trust. We contribute slightly more to this master's, and we facilitate attendance at meetings and provide in-school support. In addition, a really key and important feature of the HeartScan Embedding is that it's entirely taught by school teachers rather than academics, and many teachers find that more relevant to what they want to achieve. It's still a very rigorous and challenging programme, as its underpinning from the University of Hertfordshire proves. It runs part-time over 2 years with input from the latest and most up-to-date literature, but its focus on what's happening in the individual teacher's classroom makes it very attractive to staff. About 6 or 7 members of the trust member of staff across the trust undertake the course each year, and their final projects have been written up and published in actually a variety of books, which is rather nice. So learning projects, the TLDW programme and the HeartScan MEd now form an established CPD route for staff across our trust, which brings them into contact with relevant research to enhance their practice. The most recent development opportunity for our staff to engage with up-to-date and relevant research has come through our connection with the Chartered College of Teaching, which we're really excited about. And here I'm going to quote Elizabeth, who's one of the members of staff at Sir John Lawes, who was our trailblazer in this respect. A few years ago, Elizabeth, an extremely valued and highly talented teacher of chemistry, read Daniel Willingham's book, Why Don't Students Like School? And she was inspired by this to do further reading, and that helped her, she says, come to the realisation that there was a lot I didn't know. My ideas about what makes good teaching, informed by my training and those about me, had got stuck, and I'd reached a plateau. Research had given me a new way of thinking and a chance to develop further. Inspired by Alison Peacock's quote about the college building, an authoritative collective voice about teaching inspired and informed by research and stories of practice, Elizabeth joined the Chartered College of Teaching and subsequently signed up for the first cohort of the Chartered Teacher Programme. To say she and the school haven't looked back is an understatement. The Chartered Teacher Programme offers a different route to the MEd in Teaching and Learning, as it actually focuses on the specifics of teaching a particular subject, and for some staff, that's a particular attraction. But it also promotes an in-depth engagement with what I suppose we could call the best of what has been written widely to steal a phrase. So as well as feeling really reinvigorated in her own teaching, Elizabeth has become the go-to member of staff for helping others track down relevant research. And in fact, so popular has that been that she now provides us with a Monday morsel each week, as you can see on the slide. That goes out to staff every week, but if there's other areas that people want her to find or research for her, she will do that. Not only that, but she inspired us at Sir John Lawes to apply and be accepted jointly with Beaumont School in St Albans to become a regional deliverer of the Chartered Teacher Programme from this year, with 23 teachers, many from the Scholars Education Trust, starting the programme last month via the magic of Zoom, of course. Why do we provide all these opportunities for staff to engage with research in this way? Well, firstly, if it improves their practice, it improves the students' experience, and a better experience for the students leads to better progress and achievement. But it also, I think, says something about how we value our staff, and that brings me on to my final thought about how using research has helped us. We feel that this engagement with research supports our school and trust culture. All these opportunities help staff feel valued as professionals, and we know this from asking them for their feedback directly. And that then promotes a culture where that is the norm. This, in turn, supports recruitment and retention, as we can point to this aspect of our work as a reason to join and a reason to stay. Slightly cynically, again, if we make a significant financial investment to support a programme like the Masters or CTEach, we do have a lock-in of 1 year after completion of the course to ensure we see a return on our money, but also to help us hold on to talented staff who are often brilliant in the classroom and excellent role models for the rest of the teaching community. There's also a culture of talking about teaching and learning at every level in the trust, and a culture of taking it beyond the anecdotal by using research, however we define it, to underpin decisions and direction, which actually gives us confidence in what we're saying and the direction in which we're moving. And if we have evidence to back up our decisions, it also avoids heated debate based purely on gut feelings and instinct, although of course there's always room for those, so we can move forward more collaboratively. And our collaboration as a trust has definitely been improved by engaging with research, as demonstrated in my example about our curriculum review, and in the many CPD examples which bring staff from different schools together and promote closer working relationships. And finally, standards at our schools have risen and are rising since we developed this engagement. So I'll leave you with a quote from Elizabeth, whose personal engagement with research you heard about earlier. She said, "Although research doesn't give you a magic bullet, it does tell you the best bets. Teaching is complicated. We could spend our lives changing and adapting our lessons. To have research tell you which approaches are likely to work can save us a lot of failed experiments and, most importantly, improve the outcomes for our students. And surely that's what it's all about." Thank you very much.
Welcome back. A fascinating approach to how you develop staff, how you retain staff, how you improve outcomes for students, and everything that happens in school. So in terms of setting up a culture and an ethos, as we've been talking about since April, in terms of this is a journey that schools are going through, are planning for, in terms of how they move forward into whatever new normal. This is a time where we have had the reset button. So if you are looking to take on a different approach or modifying your approach, what a brilliant way to actually add to that arsenal by thinking about how do we actually give staff the space to breathe within our educational landscape so that they can actually develop into the leaders and the teachers that they need to be. So without further ado, I'd like to welcome Claire Robbins, OBE, to the E stage. So if we're talking about rock stars, you are part of that group, Claire. I know that you said it was this morning waking up to seeing your face everywhere on Twitter, but the work that you have been doing has, I think Adrian said, has been inspirational, and I know a lot of leaders have looked at what you've been doing within the trust in terms of how you get the engagement levels from your staff and your teams to the point where the discretionary effort, I suppose it involves a lot of discretionary effort on behalf of your team, but that doesn't come overnight. That comes from building a culture and an ethos within your organisation to enable that to happen. So you are a rock star. And just want to remind you, Adrian Rogers is doing the Twitter takeover on at Chiltern TSA. Do jump onto there and share your thoughts and your views on that. Claire, welcome.
Hi.
What a way to start Monday morning.
That's all good. Thank you to people who put some questions in the question box. That was always my concern, that on a Monday morning no one would have the energy to do that. And if it's okay with you, there's a couple of things I'd maybe like to address.
Let's jump straight.
So there were a couple of people who asked questions about how do we carry out research in a school setting, considering how busy teachers are. So I think Jessica raised that, and Chris as well. So thank you both to that. I think it's a really good point, and certainly at the learning project. So there's kind of three different levels for us. At the learning project level, we make time, so that's part of our organised inset programme. Time is dedicated to allowing staff to do that. There's at least 5 hours of inset time that are specifically dedicated to enable staff to do that. So even if they only do 5 hours of work on it, and many do more, that time is put aside. We do think that's a priority. The other thing is to try and make it as easy as possible. So I've talked a few times about the fact that we have kind of more experienced members of staff who are able to find relevant research for staff to signpost things that they might find useful. And I mentioned Elizabeth, who sends out kind of research every week so that people find it easier to engage because we help them, we signpost it for them, we try and save them time there. But then the other thing I would say is that a lot of staff they really value this because it's specifically reflecting on their work, what they're doing in the classroom. And so it feels valuable to them, perhaps in a way that sitting through something that we put on for the whole staff on something quite broad-based doesn't. So actually, I think they enjoy it and therefore they engage with it, and we try and make it as easy as possible for them. I think really that's probably how we manage that. And some people do way above. It's a bit like the children, isn't it? Some people do way above what you ask them to do, and some people do a little less. And, it all kind of comes out in the wash. There was another question from Kyle. Hello, Kyle, who wanted to ask about how we ensure that use of research challenges your thoughts and engages your own experiences, avoiding an echo chamber. And I think that's a really interesting one. Again, because so many staff are engaging with reading, I think that we do have quite a broad base of stuff coming in. And of course, staff all have, even within a school, staff have different views, have different approaches, and will be bringing different ideas to us. So there is a level of challenge within that. And we do try and find different approaches, different research to go to. I would say that the Chartered College has been really, really useful in that respect, because they put great reading lists, make reading lists available on their website for all kinds of topics. And it helps, again, us find people who perhaps we wouldn't have come across if we'd just been looking, in our comfort areas. So actually, I think the whole educational landscape has changed in this respect anyway, in that there's just more stuff available for us to find. But you're absolutely right. We do have to make sure that we're not looking always for stuff that just reinforces what we thought. But again, because people are looking at so many different areas, I think we do get that kind of broad range of materials being brought through to us. And I also touched on the fact that we do try to, the good thing about people bringing you evidence or reading, or, is that it's not just, oh, well, I think, it's perhaps you could read this. And so actually, as a senior leadership team, it's easier to engage when people are bringing you things to read that are perhaps not what you had in mind, but because there's evidence backing up what they're saying, they're not just saying, we don't like your ideas or we want to go into a different idea. It promotes a better level of conversation, I think, regardless of kind of where you actually end up going with it. So that makes sense.
Where do you want to jump to next? I mean, the part of what you just said, I think it was Lee, it kind of adds on to the questions that we had so far in terms of how do we support staff to access the academic language that is used in research, that is often seen as a barrier to teacher engagement with research. So this is about people that actually want to engage, I suppose, in this type of process, and they have various barriers. I suppose we can open it out. What are the barriers for people that actually do want to engage? I mean, we've highlighted time as one of the barriers, and that could be, and I'm talking about time within the school, but are there other barriers to do with time and also language, etc.? What have you found in your engagement within your schools?
I think that's a really interesting point about the academic language used in research. And I think, again, and this is sort of something that I was trying to get at in my presentation, there's kind of pure research, really master's, PhD level academic research that you would see in a university department. And there's kind of what we are doing at different levels on the pathway to that. And I think the key thing is to enable staff to their initial engagement at a level they feel comfortable with. So that's and again, this is something we've been doing for a while. So the staff at the school who will help with signposting research will take that into account. We'll look at, what's out there, and it might range from, you can go anywhere from sort of, an article on the TES kind of website where people are exchanging ideas on a blog, all the way up to, something that's being published and peer reviewed internationally. And you need to kind of find the right entry level for those members of staff. And some of them will never want to or get to that really high level, but some will make their way up. And again, we've got this kind of staged approach. So everybody does the learning projects. Some people then go on to teacher-led development work, which is a little bit more technical. Some people then go on to the masters and the chartered college. So it's about helping people find their way in. I mean, in many ways, it's exactly the same as you would with the students. You help them get in at the level that, works for them. And then if they're up for it, you challenge a little bit more and a little bit more to the point where they can engage happily with the more complicated stuff. I think the other thing is there is far more accessible stuff out there now. I mean, just the amount of educational research that is accessible to teachers, written by people from the classroom, the books that you see, if you engage with EduTwitter, there are people that you hear speaking and then they tell you they brought out a book and you think, well, that's interesting, I might access that. There's a lot more material out there that is easy to engage with, to get people kind of hooked into research if that's how they're going to want to go.
Yeah, and I think that was what was really good in one of the documents that you showed in your presentation, is that you actually highlight the sections, the pages. And I think just from a time point of view, and I looked at it, it really stood out for me, rather than just like, here's a book list that I want you to dip into. It's actually saying, well, actually, what the bits that we want to look at and start the conversation with is based on the information on these pages. And I think that makes it a lot more accessible in some ways from a time point of view. So that really stood out for me, and I don't often see that where it's actually some people will see it as being prescriptive and that issue to do with echo chambers and all the rest of it, but it gives people a starting point, but you haven't told them that they can't read the pages around it.
No, and I mean, if you're really fascinated by the 5 pages we picked out, then absolutely read, people will read more, but again, we've got to meet people where they are, and some people will be, I think, Daya, you've actually, there's a question there that says, how do you encourage engagement with research with staff who are not interested in it at all? Okay, some people are not, and I think Freya, you said something similar as well, where staff maybe feel they don't need to engage. We've got to try and hook them in where they are. I think the interesting thing is that even if you're not particularly, I'm trying to find a good way of phrasing this, I think the thing is that you can never be, no one is the perfect teacher, the absolute, pinnacle. No teacher, and in fact, teachers, for the most part, are hideously self-critical anyway. But I don't think any teacher ever kind of says, well, I just don't need to do anything better. And this, for the way we use the research for CPD, is about just trying to make yourself a better teacher. And so most people will engage with that, and some need a little bit more encouragement than others. And, the learning projects aren't, that tranche of staff that I identified, they are expected to do it because that's what the inset time's given for.
Yeah, and I think it's probably a good point just to remind ourselves we are professionals and we do need to stay up to date with current thinking as well as just our subject specific materials that we deal with. And we do have a due care ourselves in terms of making sure that we're up to speed with our professional thinking at any one point. And that isn't sort of like a stick to sort of like say that, but we do need to be, and if we want to be treated like professionals, then if you're a doctor or if you're a lawyer, etc., you are constantly reading and looking at what's out there at the moment and what's the thinking, what's the mood. And I think it can only make you a better practitioner. And it's quite good that we haven't really made reference to the O word here, but that CPD in general, but also CPD subject specific as well, it plays a very big part in the discussions that they have when they're inspecting a school. Because, and it was really refreshing to see, because there is an importance to it, that we do devote time. The message to leaders, I suppose, would be is that the challenge is how do you make time for it to make sure that if it's important, that you give it the space that it needs within.
I think that that reference to the subject-specific evidence that's out there is another really interesting thing that's come into priority more recently. And I think that's really healthy. And again, some staff are less interested in broad stroke kind of let's look at differentiation across the piece, because they immediately think, well, this isn't going to apply in my subject. So the ability to encourage staff to look at things in their subject area with evidence and materials that is specific. Again, it's easier for them to engage with that. They're more positive about engaging with that. That's another way of perhaps getting them to think about research and how it might back things up. So I think that subject specific opportunities is an important one to take.
Exactly. And we'd had a session with Bob Cox, who looked at challenging reading. And from a subject specific point of view as well, is that we should be pushing ourselves, as we do with our students, to read ever more challenging text, to broaden our understanding, and to have those more meaningful conversations as well. Regarding our practice. So if you haven't seen that session, that's a really good session to have a look at in terms of why we should be looking at the challenge behind reading, and that links very heavily with research-based reading as well. So yes. So where do you want to jump to next?
So Rosemary has said about what do the school and the trust leaders do in the way of research for their roles, and I think that's a really good question, because we shouldn't just be expecting the other staff to do it. But actually, I think, again, I have found that we now use, it's commonplace that before we have any trust senior team training or anything like that, that there will be reading released, there will be materials put out to get us thinking more widely about whatever topic it is that we're engaged with. And I think that's a major shift. I mean, I've been a school leader for a very long time. I've been a head for just doing the maths, about 14 years now, blimey. And certainly when I started, it was much more about kind of gut feeling and what you thought, it kind of, you went with your feeling about what was right. And I think now I would be very reluctant to make, big important decisions about my school or the trust without doing some reading and reflecting and thinking in advance. And we share research with the governors as well and with parents, so that they understand what's underpinning things. And it does make it much more possible to be convincing about what you're doing if you're able to say, we've read around this, we've looked at research, the evidence shows that, rather than just going, oh, this is what we think we should do because we just feel like it. So actually, at trust level and at leadership level in the trust, engaging with research is completely normal and sort of expected, really. Not if we're working out the duties for lunchtime, but if we're thinking about what direction we're going to take the curriculum in, or what we might do about something to do with some other project, it's really expected that we would do some reading as well. And we have a leadership It's actually kept in the SLT lavatory at my school. That just happens to have some bookshelves in it. But we have, we buy books, we share them, we exchange ideas, and the SLT are constantly kind of borrowing each other's books and saying, well, this was interesting. So, we try to model what we're expecting everybody else to do.
And making it accessible as well, like you said. And I think that goes into that whole ethos, that culture that the leaders set in place, because quite often you see environments where you're asked to do things, but the culture doesn't reflect that priority. And I think it's a real time, I think, for leaders to perhaps think, okay, what does this actually look like? We're asking this, but does it actually look like that? And do we enable that to happen? Again, there's obviously the COVID situation, the post-lockdown phase that we're going into. It's definitely something that leaders need to be looking at. How do they frame that new normal that we're going back into? Yeah. Where do you want to jump to next, Claire?
Okay, well, I noticed that Adrian has gone off track, but I assume we can allow him to do that. So
no. I liked his comment.
Oh, that's all right.
Because I mean, just from my point of view, I do quite a lot of work around making our futures more inclusive for all staff. And one of the key focuses is to do with leadership and in terms of having a diversity of thought which comes from a diversity of staff. And it's a really good point. I'm going to read it out if that's okay. Hi Claire, sorry, off track. And this is from Adrian Rogers, our CEO for Chiltern Learning Trust. But there are so very few female CEOs in the country, especially in secondary. Why do you think that is, and how do we address it, and quickly?
I think it is a confidence thing, and I think that is the issue with women in possibly in all industries, but certainly I know, talking to really talented, NQTs, because you've got to talent spot early, and you can, when you've got people coming into your organisation, you can see the ones who you think, gosh, you really could make it, as far as you want to go. I do find that there is a difference in confidence when talking to younger female staff than younger male staff about what they think they can do. I think there's a real issue with female staff looking at job descriptions or looking at opportunities and going, well, I can do 75% of that, but there's 25% I'm not confident about, so I won't apply. And I know that if you flipped it round, the guys are a bit more likely to go, yeah, I can probably do 25% of that, and I'll wing the other 75%, so let's chuck my application in. And it's trying to get women to put the application in. It's actually about applying and not feeling like, there's one item on that checklist that I'm not confident about, so I mustn't apply. And I think the more we can do to have internships, to have work shadowing, so where there are good candidates, and they don't need to work shadow a female CEO, they can if they like, but just giving those opportunities to people to spend a day following Adrian, for example, round and seeing what he does, but at whatever level that's appropriate. So I think internships, visiting different schools so you feel confident about different contexts. I think the more we can do that, the more we can encourage the kind of the next generation of school leaders to be doing that, male and female, but definitely female, then I think we will see a change. And I think it's really important that we make sure we're doing that, because as we know, there are fewer people applying for things at the moment, and that might change, I guess. And we need to promote those opportunities. But I think it's a confidence thing. I think there's some really good CPD starting to come out from organisations like Forum Strategy and Ambition Institute, who are actually looking to give people training for a MAT role as well. And I think those are really useful, and we should be kind of looking at that. But then I think, individual trusts need to really be talent spotting early and giving people the opportunity to kind of visualize themselves in the next steps.
Yeah, I mean, it's a tricky balance, and when I've looked at job adverts and the wording within job adverts and making adverts more accessible, it's a tricky balance between making the job hold the level that it is, but also to say that you have the essentials and then you have the desirables, you have all those different aspects that you're looking for in a candidate, but it's the message that's in between the lines that sometimes people feel that there is no way that I've got time for that. But
Yeah.
I mean, we are still, even though we've moved so far forward, women are still the main the home builders, the family, hold the family unit together, and that's still one of the biggest challenges that women feel that they can't do these roles because they can't commit to it in the way that they feel that they are expected to.
Yeah, I think there's a lot of potentially there's a lot of kind of guilt about that, and I think that what those of us who are in leadership positions need to be trying to remember to do is put on the out of office, go home at a sensible time, prioritize other things when you need to. Because if we're sort of modelling, oh my God, I'm in the office till all hours and I'm going to answer that email at 3 o'clock in the morning and, bang out a paper on, next steps over Sundays, I think that's really unhelpful. And you don't actually need to do that. And actually, I hope that some of this kind of remote working that we're doing now will help us, those of us who are currently in leadership positions, reflect that we can do some of these things remotely from home. We can go home and do things. We can, we don't need to be sort of signaling, gosh, how hard we work by being, that presenteeism. We can do it in different ways. We can work more efficiently and we can enable other people to work more efficiently and flexibly. And I'm hoping that's one of the positives that comes out of what we've had to engage with recently. But I think that's the other thing to point out, all of us in the last few weeks have been making it up. Nobody applied to become a CEO of a trust and went because I'm really good at pandemic response. And we've all had to make it up. So it doesn't matter, you can have been a CEO for years or 10 minutes. You never know everything. You just need to do your best.
And I think what it all goes back to again is the culture and the ethos that our leaders create within our schools. Whether you're going into becoming a middle leader, whether you're going into become an assistant head, deputy head, or even head teachers, is setting that up so that at each one of those stages that it feels accessible to all people. Because you're not suddenly going to say, well, that was the baptism of fire, now you become a CEO and you can put your feet up. People are thinking it just gets worse. The pressures get worse, the decisions get harder, which they inevitably do because you're responsible for more people. But I think that culture that we set up that makes people feel that I can do those roles or I can't is something that leaders do have control over to some degree. Where do you want to finish? I think we've got probably time just to squeeze in anything that you want to. Did we cover the question with Rebecca Griffiths to do with differentiating research between ITT and NQT?
Yeah. Okay. So I suppose actually the pressure that we're looking at when we return in September, I mean, for all of us, what it's going to be like in September is a challenge because we don't know. We're planning now for something that is 6 weeks away. And I think if we are going to prioritise research between ITT and NQT, I think, again, my point about providing materials, not saying to, relatively inexperienced members of the teaching profession, you should engage with research, off you go. I think that giving them, page references or specific things to look at and specific things to reflect on, making it easy for them is going to be the way to help them to continue to, because they do good work on research in ITT. Now, I think, like I said earlier, it's much improved from my experience. And if we want to keep that momentum going, I think we're going to have to help them by providing signposting, pathways for them to access things that are going to be useful in what is going to be, and that's that dreadful phrase, the new normal. So I think really we should differentiate it by kind of making it more accessible, signposting, helping them there, so that they can continue to engage whilst dealing with whatever September brings.
Absolutely. And yes, this is the time. This is the time. But I mean, it is, and I think it's definitely something that people need to think about what point they want to access the research app that suits them, and then challenge themselves to go that one step further and to go that one step further. And no one starts off born with a PhD or everybody gets to that level, and everybody gets to it at their own point in terms of, and reaches a point that suits them. So I think that's probably the thing that I've taken away from this, is making sure, one, it's accessible, and secondly, it doesn't hinder or create barriers within the teams that you have within the schools, but they also do need to see the benefit of it. So actually making it actionable at the end of that, so people can see, oh, okay, based on the work, these are the outcomes, and this is how it's improved my landscape in my school. So it's got to be something that's followed through, and I think the work that you've done within the trust, within your trust there, I think it is an example of how it can be done and how it should be done. And do bombard Claire or the Scholars Educational Trust on Twitter with more information, and I'm sure they'll share what they can in terms of their practice. And the links that were in the presentations, I'll try and pull some of those off and get those out to the attendees as well. In the follow-up emails as well. A couple of people have asked about whether that presentation will be made available. We can have that discussion. If that can be made available, I can send that out as well.
I can send it.
Yeah. So thank you, Claire. The time does fly. That's our first session of our last week. And as I said earlier on, what a way to start our final week. Been really, really looking forward to this session and speaking to you. So thank you, Claire.
Pleasure.
And that's the end of our first session of our last week. This week we've got 4 more sessions to come. Tomorrow we're going to be looking at something that it is going to be challenging in terms of how we're present tomorrow, but also the significance of it. We're looking at how we're going to help our students and young people deal with the process of grief and loss moving forward. And the point of reference is the Luton area, but I think it will resonate with a lot of people that are returning to schools and dealing with our students in whatever shape and form they come back to us in. And that's delivered by 2 people from Luton Borough Council. We've got Wajma Tokmani and we've got Juliet O'Callaghan, who will be discussing that issue tomorrow. It's already looking to be sold out, but I have posted the links out there and I have sent it out as an email to everybody. So do join on there and register. And again, that session will be made available to you afterwards as well. On Wednesday, we have Lorraine Hughes, who is the Director of Education for Chiltern Learning Trust, who's going to be looking at what work we're doing at the moment to make our curricula more inclusive as we move forward. All the issues that we've discussed, and a lot of that work was on the back of our Black Lives Matter anti-racism webinar, which is to do with the whole school responsibility. And as Claire Robbins mentioned earlier, and I have tweeted that out while she was mentioning it, if you haven't watched it, do jump into that and have a look at that, and do share your thoughts on that. Let us know what you've been doing as well in the last few weeks regarding that issue. On Thursday, we're going to be with Abid Khan, who will be looking at safeguarding, how it's not just a bolt-on within our schools, and what they've been doing within Cholney High School for boys, and just the wider practice of safeguarding. And then Friday, we have our finale, our final session. We have Diana Asaji, who will be looking at courageous leadership at all levels. And I really want everybody that is possible. I think we should have a national 9 till 10 o'clock break in all our schools so that we can join in on Friday on that session and share your thoughts. And during the course of this week, we will let you know what's coming up next. We've got hashtag CPD EduChat. I have my colleague James Searle, who is currently putting all of this together. There will be a summer program that you can just dip in and out of as you want to, and moving forward into the next academic year as well. There's a whole host of CPD that we're going to be putting on for you, so do stay tuned for that. Do share your thoughts. Your engagement is so important to us. Use the hashtag LDeduchat, whichever platform that you use. We will find that, and it'd be really good to see your thoughts, or hear your thoughts, should I say, on our sessions. This is me, Arv Cowshaw, signing off for another session of hashtag LDeduchat, and I shall see you soon. Thank you.